All right, so we've got Pace of Change. It's Rohit Ambekar. Rohit, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to be talking about the productivity paradox. You have outlined, clearly to me that you don't want to be taken as an expert as far as this is concerned. You're not an authority as far as this is concerned, but you are an executive, and you have been for quite some time, and you're aware of the productivity paradox. You've been through cycles of the productivity paradox. So this is why it's appropriate to talk about with you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
All right. So if you would be so kind as to just define it and then take us through, what we're going through one more time again here as we go through intelligent automation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the concept of this productivity paradox kind of goes back to the 70s, 80s, where when the technology revolution started, computers, desktop versions and automation and all of it, people kind of thought that, this technology that we have, the new IT revolution that started will displace jobs, the productivity will increase, exponentially, and kind of people had this huge, big dreams. Then we will, just like the industrial revolution, right? It will change the world that we live in. Now, in reality, if you look at the macro picture, nothing of what was thought would happen happened, right? So jobs increased where people thought the jobs will go away, right? So you see that many countries like India, and Europe, right, and China, all these countries, the IT revolution created more jobs here, but at the same time, if you look at the GDP of, let's say, United States here, the output that people thought will significantly change didn't happen. It was kind of flat. And people then, they just didn't understand why what we were hoping to happen didn't happen. And that's where they call this a productivity paradox, because the productivity, there was no signs of any productivity anywhere. Either in the GDP, in the jobs, no productivity, right? And there are a lot of hypotheses as to why this happened. First, they said, look, your revenue may have gone up, but because you have created this new high-paying jobs, it offsets any gains you may have achieved as a result of this high-paying jobs. IT jobs are more high-paying, right? You created more jobs. So it kind of shifted the balance of economy, and then it kind of created this. It was a very good equalizer. Many of these third world countries, they started catching up, but as a whole world economy, right, it kind of neutralized. So that is one hypothesis. The second hypothesis, they say we were just not measuring the right things, right? Earlier, the measurement was mostly in widgets. We thought that anything physical thing that you create is the measurement of productivity. But it created a lot of intellectual properties. Like algorithms are not products. Like Facebook is not a product. Google is not a product in the traditional sense, right? So that is where all this new value that got created, Instagram, it's not a tangible product that you can measure and on a traditional scale that you can say, look, we have created 100 widgets of Facebook profile. It doesn't work that way. Right? So that is another hypothesis to what we measured is completely different. And what we thought of as value in the old economy is not the same that we think of as value in the new economy. So there are a lot of these concepts that people think about. But today, if you think about AI, machine learning, blockchain, we are going through exactly the same cycle that we went through 70s, 80s, and 90s. And people are asking, we are all seeing this ML, AI, blockchain. Show me productivity, show me money. It's not to be seen, right? So that kind of is what explains this productivity paradox. And in some ways, the way to think about this is, look, you have to be open in your understanding that new value creation scenarios will emerge. Just like the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Googles started, right? There will be new value, new platforms. And probably we still don't have the yardstick, a scale of measure to know what those would be.
Whether it's the output or the measurement, it sounds like what you're saying is the true error is looking at the value or the output or the measurement with today's eyes. If you look at it with today's eyes, you will be flummoxed. There will not be the results that you're looking for or at. However, if you are able to look at whatever happens with tomorrow's eyes, well, then there's where the rubber meets the road, quite literally.
Absolutely.
And probably with an autonomous vehicle, but that's a totally different conversation.
Yep.
So I guess if I'm sitting in your seat, or I'm, one of your colleagues trying to just make my way through this, how can I adopt tomorrow's eyes to look at what I'm doing now? How is that even conceivable?
Think about, like, for example, like when you're optimizing for anything, right? You kind of have to think in only two ways. One is, am I creating a new product that doesn't exist, right? Is it a product innovation? And the second thing you have to say is, look, the product doesn't change. A phone is still a phone, but the way I can add more to what already is done, I'll make phone into a camera, or I'll make phone into a Walkman, right? So you have to think about, it's a form factor. It's not a new product, but you're changing the form of an existing product so that you can stuff more into it, right? So these are the traditional two ways of looking at it. Now, the way to think, at least in my function in an organization, the way we think about it is there's a third dimension that is emerging very, very, very strongly, which is, it doesn't really matter. Is it a product form? Is it a form innovation? Is it a strategy innovation? If it doesn't appeal to your customers, then it doesn't really matter, right? Now, from a customer's perspective, there are articulated needs and there are unarticulated needs. An articulated need is, think about the Ford old way of saying the articulated need is, look, give me fast horses. The unarticulated need is, I need to go from point A to point B, make it reach there faster. How you do it is unarticulated need. They don't know that they needed cars, right? So you kind of have to think about, from if you put your customer in the center and say, what are your articulated and unarticulated needs? I think there are a lot of innovative scenarios that will emerge. Right? And the next $1 billion business would probably come from an unarticulated need of a customer.
Yeah. So just as you were talking, I envisioned, you said phone, and I envisioned the way that my phone looked in 1984, right? And that looks obviously very different than my phone in 2019. But I think your greater point is not to look at the phone. If I were to, in 1984, look at the power line, at least look at the power line and what was possible in what was feeding the phone. And from my customer's perspective, how could I redefine that relationship with the power line? Then maybe I'd be onto something. If I'm just looking at the phone, well, that's not going to do me any good.
Right. Now that's where it is, right? Which is, you kind of have to think about, what is the third dimension here? The third dimension of how do you put your customer at the center and create value from things that doesn't exist today. And maybe the needs are the same thing. It's a food, clothing, shelter, need for attention. It's exactly the same needs that we have, right? You kind of have to think about different ways. I mean, your need for attention earlier was your social circles, right? Now today the need for attention is Instagram. Your sense of happiness is not defined by truly what you do, but what you show to your friends.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So the paradigms are changing, and many of these, if you think about it from an enterprise perspective, right? So what are some of these unarticulated needs of the customers that we can meet as a result of this ML, AI, right? And these things will all come through happenstance, through emergence, where you kind of, a lot of things work together and some random accidents will happen. And the beauty of the whole thing is that because of the interconnected nature of the world, and because the data is so rich, and you're able to put all this powerful compute on top of this data, your speed at which you will come out with this new emergent scenarios, the unarticulated needs of the customers, is the pace is becoming faster and faster.
Which is why this is called pace of change. However, I am, responsible for my data, for my processes, if I'm, one of your colleagues. And so if I reimagine those processes and I uncover that data digitally in a way that suits my business today and suits, who I report to today, I'm going to be further behind, and I'm not going to have that productivity in the same way as if I were to take it from my consumer's perspective right now, as we speak.
Yeah. And the most interesting thing is the reason why you will not see, I mean, I can tell you very clearly within some of the projects that we have going on, you will not see the productivity increases because how do you measure experience? How do you quantify a better experience? It doesn't go on your GDP metric. Right?
Now, well, the NPS, is that good enough? Is that, I don't mean to get too far into the weeds, but am I somewhere if at least I'm looking at that?
Yeah, the net promoter score, the NPS is not it's a very subjective phenomenon. It doesn't land on the profit and loss accounts of the companies.
It doesn't take that into account.
Exactly. And many of the traditional way of measuring your GDP output is mostly in dollar terms. And NPS is not a dollar metric. It will eventually result through the second, third, and fourth order of impact. It will result in your dollar terms. But even for that to happen, every technology will go through, I kind of call it a decade of change, right? If you look at cloud, we started talking about cloud 10 years back. Now it almost takes a 10-year time frame for you to see the revenue show up either in Microsoft's P&L or in Amazon's P&L, Google's P&L, right? It's always a decade worth of investment that will show off in the P&L after 10 years, right? So kind of the place we are in today, blockchain, ML, AI, in the early stages. For this experience to show off as as a dollar on somebody's P&L.
But as we figure this out, as again, this is called pace of change. Should I be thinking that probably once we figure this out, it will be less than a decade on this one?
Yeah, that's at least the expectation. The pace of change is so fast that it is no longer a decade, and it will be much faster than that. And then the productivity paradox will be shorter. What took 20 years in the early and then 10 years, maybe you will kind of start thinking in terms of 5 years.
And we'll continue to have this conversation through that time period. How about that?
Absolutely. This is fun.
Yeah, Rohit, it is fun. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Looking forward to the next one already.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Look at that. Come on. Oh, I recorded to the cloud.